Vendor helps hungry child and 10 years later is surprised with. Hello, welcome. Enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It was a hot morning in Rosario do Vale, and the sound of stalls being set up mixed with the chatter of early customers choosing the freshest fruits. Mary, with her calloused hands and determined gaze, was carefully arranging bright red apples into perfect pyramids. Her stall was modest but always stood out for its neatness and the warm smile she gave everyone who passed by. Although her life was full of challenges, Mary never let the sadness she carried show. Losing her husband years ago and being separated from her only daughter, who had moved to the capital for work, had left an emptiness in her heart. But Mary found purpose in the marketplace, sharing kind words and juicy apples, even when her own pockets were nearly empty. That morning, as she watched the first rays of sunlight reflect on the fruits she had washed at dawn, she noticed a thin, disheveled young man standing at a cautious distance. He seemed hesitant, looking at the stalls without approaching any. His eyes reflected a mix of hunger, shame, and desperation. Mary could recognize that look. It was the same one she had seen in her own reflection on the hardest days after her husband's death, when the future seemed uncertain, and every day felt like a battle. She decided to act. Carefully, she picked up an apple and walked toward the young man. Her steps were steady, but her heart was racing. She didn't know who he was or what had brought him to this situation, but something inside her told her he needed help. As she approached, the young man took a step back, as if expecting to be scolded. Mary smiled and held out the apple. "You look tired, son. Take it, it's just an apple." He hesitated, but hunger got the better of him. He took the apple with trembling hands and murmured a barely audible thank you. Mary realized that wouldn't be enough. "Are you traveling?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The young man finally lifted his eyes, revealing tears brimming in them. I need to get to the next town. They said I might find work there. But I don't even have money for the bus fare," he confessed, his voice breaking. Mary felt a pang in her chest. She didn't have much either, but she knew she could spare a small part of her savings. She took the cloth purse tied around her waist and pulled out a few coins. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a bus ticket. "Here. Use this to get there and start fresh. Just promise me you won't give up," she said, holding back the tears welling in her own eyes. The young man took the money with unsteady hands, stunned by the generosity of a stranger. "I have no way to repay you, but one day, I'll come back. I promise I'll come back to repay your kindness," he said, clutching the coins tightly. Mary simply smiled and shook her head. For her, nothing more was needed. As the young man walked away, she returned to her stall with a light heart. She didn't know if he would truly come back or if life would allow her to see the result of her help, but she knew she had done the right thing. Mary watched the young man walk away, clutching the apple and the coins as if they were treasures. She sighed softly, brushing her hands on her apron before turning back to her stall. The morning had only just begun, and there was still work to do. As the day unfolded, Mary's mind occasionally wandered back to the young man. She wondered if he would make it to the next town safely and find the job he was hoping for. But soon, the bustle of the market swept her thoughts away. Regular customers greeted her warmly, chatting about the weather or the news in town. Mary responded with her usual kindness, her focus returning to the here and now. By midday, the sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the marketplace. A light breeze carried the sweet scent of ripe fruit and the faint clinking of coins as vendors counted their earnings. Mary was wiping her brow with the corner of her apron when a familiar face appeared, Donna Selina, her neighbor and a longtime friend. "Mary, you look deep in thought today," Selina said, setting down her basket filled with vegetables. "Just thinking about life," Mary replied with a faint smile. Selina tilted her head, narrowing her eyes as if trying to read Mary's thoughts. "Something happened, didn't it?" Mary hesitated, then shared the story of the young man. She spoke of his desperation, the little she had given, and the promise he had made to return. "You're always helping people, even when you don't have much yourself," Selina said, shaking her head in a mix of admiration and concern. "But be careful, Mary. Not everyone appreciates kindness." Mary nodded, understanding her friend's caution. Yet deep down, she believed that the gesture, no matter how small, could make a difference. "I just hope he finds his way, Selina. That's all." The two women continued chatting for a while before Selina moved on to finish her shopping. Mary returned to her work, the rest of the day passing in the usual rhythm of selling and smiling. As night fell, Mary packed up her stall and made her way home. Her house, small and weathered, stood at the edge of town. The wooden shutters creaked in the evening breeze, and the roof bore the marks of years without repair. Yet, it was a place of warmth and comfort, a reflection of Mary's resilience. Sitting by the window with a cup of tea, Mary allowed herself a moment of stillness. The stars outside shone brightly, and the quiet hum of the crickets filled the air. She thought of the young man again, silently wishing him strength for whatever lay ahead. Tomorrow, she would return to the market, just as she always did. Life went on, full of challenges and small joys. And though she couldn't know it yet, the seeds of her kindness had already begun to take root. The next morning, Mary woke before dawn, as always. The faint glow of the rising sun seeped through the worn shutters of her little house, casting soft streaks of light on the walls. She tied her apron around her waist, gathered her baskets, and made her way to the market. The routine felt familiar and comforting, yet Mary couldn't shake the lingering thought of the young man. She found herself glancing at the faces of strangers as if hoping he might reappear. Shaking her head, she reminded herself to focus. Life was unpredictable, and expecting anything in return for her gesture was foolish. As the hours passed, the market grew busier. Vendors shouted their prices, children darted between stalls, and the air buzzed with life. Mary's apples and oranges were selling quickly, and she was too occupied to notice a small commotion a few stalls down. "Move along, boy," a gruff voice barked. Mary turned her head in time to see a young boy being shoved away from a bread stand by its irritated owner. The boy, no older than 10, looked terrified, clutching his stomach as if to suppress the hunger that had likely driven him to beg. Without thinking, Mary left her stall and approached the boy. His eyes darted around nervously, and he flinched as she knelt beside him. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly. The boy didn't speak but nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. Mary reached into her basket, pulling out a ripe orange. "Here. It's sweet and fresh," she said, offering it to him. The boy hesitated before taking it, his small hands trembling. He bit into the orange eagerly, juice dripping down his chin as he devoured the fruit. "Thank you," he mumbled between bites. Mary smiled. "What's your name?" "Matthias," he said quietly. "Well, Matthias, if you're ever hungry again, you can always find me here," Mary said, brushing his hair gently before returning to her stall. She couldn't help but notice the disapproving stares of a few vendors nearby. To some, kindness was seen as weakness, especially when resources were scarce. But Mary paid no mind. She believed that compassion was never wasted. As the day wound down and the market emptied, Mary packed up her remaining fruits and began the walk home. Her thoughts were a mixture of the young boy, Matthias, and the young man from the day before. Their faces lingered in her mind, their stories unknown but their struggles clear. Arriving at her house, she set her baskets down and lit a small lamp. The warm glow filled the room as she prepared a simple meal of bread and soup. Sitting at her table, Mary reflected on the moments of the day, feeling both the weight of her own hardships and the satisfaction of having helped. Her gaze wandered to the old wooden box on the shelf above the stove. Inside were the few coins she had managed to save. She sighed, knowing that each act of generosity left her with less for herself. Still, there was a quiet reassurance in her heart that she wouldn't trade for all the money in the world. As she blew out the lamp and settled into bed, the room fell silent. Outside, the faint rustling of leaves in the wind was the only sound. Mary closed her eyes, the faces of Matthias and the young man still vivid in her mind. She whispered a small prayer, hoping the paths of those she had helped would lead them to better days. Unbeknownst to her, those very acts of kindness were already setting events in motion, threads of fate weaving together in ways she could never imagine. The following week brought a chill to the air, signaling the arrival of early autumn. The mornings were now cloaked in a light mist, and Mary found herself bundling up in an old shawl as she walked to the market. Her steps were steady, though her thoughts carried the weight of uncertainty. The memory of Matthias lingered. Each time Mary scanned the bustling streets, she half expected to see the boy darting between stalls again. But he didn't return, at least not right away. Instead, the market carried on as usual, the rhythm of buying and selling masking the quiet struggles of those like Matthias or the young man from before. One evening, as Mary closed her stall and began her journey home, she noticed a figure sitting on the edge of the town square. The dim light from a nearby lantern revealed a boy huddled in a corner, arms wrapped around his knees. Her heart sank. It was Matthias. She approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. His head lifted at the sound of her footsteps, and recognition softened the wary look in his eyes. "Matthias," she called gently, kneeling beside him. "What are you doing here so late?" The boy hesitated, his gaze shifting to the ground. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he admitted in a whisper. Mary's chest tightened. She could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the kind that came from a life spent on the edges of survival. "Come with me," she said, standing and offering her hand. He looked up at her, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Are you sure?" "Of course, I am. You'll be warm and safe for tonight. Come on." He hesitated for only a moment before taking her hand. Together, they walked through the quiet streets to Mary's modest home. As they stepped inside, she lit the lamp and gestured for him to sit at the small wooden table. "You must be hungry," she said, already pulling out bread and a jar of homemade jam. Matthias nodded, his eyes wide as he watched her work. She placed the food in front of him and poured a small cup of milk, setting it down with a gentle smile. "Eat as much as you want," she said. He didn't need to be told twice. He devoured the bread with a fervor that made Mary's chest ache. She sat across from him, watching quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," he said after finishing, his voice stronger now. "You don't have to thank me," Mary replied. "But you do need to tell me about yourself. Where is your family?" Matthias looked away, his small fingers tracing the edge of the plate. "I don't have one anymore. My parents, they got sick last year. After that, I had nowhere to go." Mary swallowed hard, her heart breaking for him. She reached out, placing a hand over his. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "You can stay here tonight, and we'll figure out what to do in the morning." The boy nodded, tears welling in his eyes but not falling. That night, Mary prepared a small bed for Matthias in the corner of the room, using old blankets and pillows she had saved. As she watched him curl up, his body finally relaxing into sleep, she felt a mix of sorrow and determination. Her life was simple, her resources limited, but she couldn't ignore the needs of someone so young and vulnerable. Matthias reminded her of a time when she, too, had relied on the kindness of others to get through her darkest moments. Sitting by the window with the lamp dimmed, Mary whispered another prayer. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: Matthias had found his way to her for a reason. And she would do everything in her power to help him. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Mary's modest home, casting a soft glow over the room. Matthias was still curled up in the makeshift bed Mary had prepared, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. For the first time in what seemed like ages, the boy looked at peace. Mary moved quietly around the room, not wanting to wake him. She heated water for tea and sliced a few pieces of bread, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. Her own life was far from easy, but turning Matthias away wasn't an option. As the aroma of tea filled the air, Matthias stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he looked confused, as though trying to remember where he was. Then his gaze settled on Mary, who greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said, placing a cup of tea and a plate of bread on the table. "Come and eat. You'll feel better with some food in your stomach." Matthias sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes before making his way to the table. He climbed onto the chair and took a hesitant sip of the tea. "Is this really okay?" he asked, his voice small. Mary sat across from him, her hands resting on the table. "Of course, it is. You're my guest now, Matthias. But we'll need to talk about what comes next." The boy nodded, taking a bite of the bread. Between bites, he began to open up, telling Mary bits and pieces of his life. He spoke of his parents, of how kind they had been despite their struggles, and how he had tried to survive on his own after they passed. His words were halting at times, but Mary listened patiently, never interrupting. "You've been through so much," she said softly when he finished. "But you're here now, and that's what matters. We'll figure out a way to make things better." Matthias looked at her, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Mary leaned forward slightly, her expression tender. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing. And because I believe that kindness always finds a way to come back." "You're not alone, Matthias." His lower lip trembled, but he quickly wiped his eyes and nodded. The day passed in a blur of quiet activity. Mary took Matthias to the market with her, introducing him to some of the vendors who greeted him with polite curiosity. While most didn't ask questions, a few whispered to each other as they watched Mary's stall. She ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on teaching Matthias small tasks, like arranging the fruits and counting change. The boy's natural eagerness shone through as he helped. Though his hands were small and inexperienced, he was careful and quick to learn. By the end of the day, Mary saw a faint spark of confidence in him. That evening, as they walked home together, Matthias carried one of the lighter baskets. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Mary," Matthias said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes, dear," she replied, looking down at him. Do you think I can stay? Just for a little while?" Mary stopped walking and crouched to his level, her hands resting on his shoulders. "You can stay as long as you need, Matthias. This is your home now, too." The boy's face lit up with a mixture of relief and joy. For the first time since she had met him, he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made Mary's heart swell. As they reached the house, Mary felt a sense of quiet purpose settle over her. Life was unpredictable and often unkind, but in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. Matthias had brought something new into her life, a reminder that hope could always be found, even in the most unexpected places. Over the next few weeks, Mary and Matthias settled into a rhythm. The boy quickly became an indispensable part of her daily routine, accompanying her to the market each morning and helping in whatever way he could. Though his hands were small, his enthusiasm was boundless, and Mary couldn't help but marvel at how quickly he adapted. The marketplace had taken notice of Matthias's presence. Some vendors welcomed him with warmth, offering him an extra piece of bread or a kind smile. Others, however, whispered behind Mary's back, their murmurs carrying a mix of curiosity and judgment. "She can barely make ends meet herself. Why take on another mouth to feed?" one vendor remarked to another as they watched Matthias stack apples at Mary's stall. Mary pretended not to hear. She kept her focus on her work and on Matthias, who seemed blissfully unaware of the whispers. His concentration was fixed on arranging the fruit into neat piles, his small hands working diligently. One particularly chilly morning, as Mary adjusted the scarf around her neck, Donna Selina approached, her face lined with concern. "Mary, a word?" she asked softly. Mary nodded, stepping away from the stall. Selina glanced toward Matthias, who was chatting with a customer, his face bright with a rare smile. "I admire your heart, Mary." "I do," Selina began. "But people are starting to talk. They think you're taking on more than you can handle." Mary sighed, folding her arms against the cold. "I know what they're saying. But what kind of person would I be if I turned him away? He's just a child, Selina." "I understand," Selina said, her tone softening. "But you have to think about yourself too. You're not young, Mary. You work so hard already." Mary gave her friend a small, tired smile. "He needs me, Selina. And maybe I need him too. The house feels less empty with him there. I don't think I've smiled this much in years." Selina nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "Just promise me you'll let me know if you ever need help. You don't have to carry everything alone." "I promise," Mary replied, squeezing her friend's hand. As the day wore on, the market grew busier. Customers came and went, filling their baskets with produce and exchanging cheerful greetings with Mary and Matthias. The boy's shyness began to melt away as he grew more confident in his new role. He even started joking with a few regulars, his laughter bright and unguarded. By the afternoon, the stall had nearly sold out. Matthias was counting the coins they had earned and a man approached, an unfamiliar face in the crowd. He was tall, with a weathered hat and a serious expression. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice low. "Are you the boy's guardian?" Mary stiffened, glancing at Matthias, who looked back at her with wide eyes. "I suppose I am, for now," Mary replied, her tone cautious. "Why do you ask?" The man removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "I'm from the next town over. There's been talk of a boy who's been wandering alone, and some folks have been worried. I just wanted to make sure he's being cared for." Mary relaxed slightly but kept her expression steady. "He's safe here with me. He's not wandering anymore." The man nodded. "Good. That's good to hear. If you ever need anything, the people in our town are willing to help. We've got some supplies we can spare if it would make things easier for you." Mary's eyes softened at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As the man walked away, Mary felt a wave of relief. For the first time, she realized that her decision to care for Matthias had begun to ripple outward, drawing support from places she hadn't anticipated. That night, as she and Matthias shared a simple dinner, she told him about the man's offer. Matthias's eyes widened in surprise. "People really want to help us?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Mary reached across the table, brushing a stray crumb from his cheek. "When we give kindness, it finds its way back to us, Matthias. You'll see." As they cleaned up and prepared for bed, Mary felt a quiet sense of hope taking root. Her small home, once so lonely and quiet, now felt alive with possibility. The following days brought a noticeable shift in the air. Word of the man's visit had spread through the market, and the once muted whispers around Mary and Matthias began to change. Some vendors softened their glances, nodding in acknowledgement when Mary passed by, while others still looked skeptical, muttering to themselves. Mary remained focused. She knew people would always have opinions, but they wouldn't change her decision to care for Matthias. The boy had become a light in her life, and every day she saw his confidence grow. One crisp morning, as Mary and Matthias opened their stall, a group of women approached. Among them was Donna Helena, the baker who ran a stand nearby. She was known for her sharp tongue but also her impeccable sweet rolls, which were beloved in the market. "Mary," Helena began, her tone more curious than critical, "you've taken on quite the responsibility with that boy. How are you managing?" Mary straightened her apron, her voice calm but firm. We manage fine, Dona Helena. He's a good boy, and he helps more than you'd expect. Helena tilted her head, studying Mateus, who was carefully arranging oranges. Well, she said after a moment, if he's staying with you, he'll need more than oranges and bread to grow strong. Bring him by my stand later, I'll set aside some pastries for him. On the house. Mary blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. That's very kind of you, Helena. Thank you. The baker shrugged, waving a dismissive hand. Don't mention it. Just make sure the boy eats. He's skin and bones. The interaction left Mary both surprised and heartened. As the day went on, other small acts of kindness trickled in, a bag of rice from the grocer, an extra handful of vegetables from a farmer. Mateus noticed, his curiosity brimming as he helped Mary load the gifts into their cart. Why are people being so nice all of a sudden? He asked as they walked home. Mary smiled, looking down at him. Sometimes, it just takes one person to show kindness, and others realize they can do the same. Kindness grows, Mateus, like a tree from a seed. That evening, Mary prepared a larger meal than usual, using some of the fresh ingredients they had received. As they ate, Mateus seemed quieter than usual, his gaze thoughtful. Mary, he said finally, setting down his fork, do you think I could help someone too? The way you helped me? Her chest tightened at the question, a wave of pride washing over her. You already do, Mateus. Every time you smile or help someone at the market, you're spreading kindness. But as you grow, you'll find even more ways to help. I know it. Mateus's face lit up with a shy smile, and he nodded. I want to be like you someday. Mary reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You already are, dear. Later that night, after Mateus had fallen asleep, Mary sat by the window, staring out at the darkened streets. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, and the stillness of the night wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. She thought about how her life had changed since Mateus had arrived. The loneliness that once filled her small house had been replaced with laughter, questions, and moments of quiet joy. Mary's gaze shifted to the small wooden box on her shelf. She opened it, counting the few coins she had left. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going for now. As she closed the box, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would keep moving forward, not just for her own sake, but for Mateus. He had become her reason to hope, and she would do everything she could to ensure his future was brighter than his past. The chill of autumn deepened, painting the trees around Rosario do Vale in shades of gold and crimson. The mornings grew brisk, and Mary began bringing an extra shawl for Mateus to wrap around himself as they walked to the market. The boy's cheeks were rosy from the cold, but his smile was as warm as ever. One morning, as they set up their stall, a familiar figure appeared through the light mist of the marketplace. It was the tall man from the neighboring town who had visited weeks earlier. This time, he wasn't alone, 2 other men accompanied him, each carrying small bundles wrapped in cloth. Good morning, the man greeted, tipping his hat. Mary straightened from where she was arranging apples, her expression cautious but polite. Good morning. How can I help you? The man stepped forward, setting down his bundle. We've brought some things for you and the boy. It's not much, but we heard how you've been caring for him, and we wanted to help. Mateus, who had been stacking oranges, froze mid-motion, his eyes darting between the men and Mary. Go on, Mary encouraged softly, gesturing for Mateus to approach. The boy hesitated but eventually stepped forward as the men unwrapped their bundles. Inside were simple but meaningful gifts, a warm coat, sturdy boots, and a few jars of preserves. These are for you, one of the men said to Mateus, his tone kind but firm. A boy needs to be warm and well-fed, especially as winter comes. Mateus stared at the items, his hands twitching at his sides. Finally, he looked up at Mary, as if seeking permission. They're for you, dear, Mary said gently. Go on, try them. The boy hesitated for a moment longer before picking up the coat. It was slightly large, but as he slipped it on, his face broke into a wide smile. "It's so warm," he said, his voice filled with wonder. The men chuckled, nodding in satisfaction. "Good. You'll grow into it, lad." Mary turned to the men, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Truly, I don't know how to repay you." The tall man shook his head. "No need for that, ma'am. You've already done more than most would by taking him in. This is just our way of lending a hand." After the men left, Matthias remained quiet, his fingers running over the thick fabric of the coat. Mary watched him with a tender smile. "Do you like it?" she asked. He nodded, his voice soft. "No one's ever given me something like this before." Mary knelt in front of him, adjusting the collar of the coat. "You deserve it, Matthias. People see how special you are, just like I do." The boy blinked rapidly, and for a moment, it seemed like he might cry. But he quickly threw his arms around Mary, hugging her tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. As the day went on, Matthias wore the coat proudly, his newfound confidence drawing smiles from customers. Several vendors even commented on how sharp he looked, further brightening his spirits. That evening, as they walked home, Matthias carried one of the lighter baskets while Mary carried the heavier one. The sky was clear, and the stars twinkled above them like tiny lanterns. "Mary," Matthias said, breaking the silence, "do you think the people who helped us today will need help someday too?" Mary considered his question for a moment before answering. "Everyone needs help at some point, Matthias. That's why it's important to give when we can. Because when it's our turn to need, we'll find others ready to do the same." The boy nodded thoughtfully, his steps steady alongside hers. As they reached their small house, Mary felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the gifts they had received, but for the kindness of strangers and the way it was shaping Matthias into someone who understood the value of compassion. Inside the house, the warmth of the fire enveloped them as they settled in for the night. Mary caught Matthias staring at the jars of preserves, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Can we try one now?" he asked, his voice tentative. Mary laughed softly, nodding. "Of course, we can." As she opened a jar and spread the sweet jam onto slices of bread, the two sat together at the table, sharing a moment of simple joy. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but in their small home, there was warmth, hope, and a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. The days turned colder as winter approached, and the bustling market began to shift. Vendors sold hearty root vegetables, warm drinks, and thick blankets. The air smelled of spices and smoke from nearby fires, creating a sense of both urgency and comfort. Mary and Matthias adapted to the season, bundling up in extra layers as they continued their routine at the stall. Matthias, now a fixture in the market, greeted customers with confidence. His laughter echoed across the stalls as he chatted with familiar faces. Mary couldn't help but feel a swell of pride every time someone commented on how much he had grown, not just in stature, but in spirit. One frosty morning, as Mary and Matthias were setting up, a woman approached the stall. She was well dressed, her coat lined with fur, and her hands gloved in leather. Her face, though beautiful, bore a distant expression, as if she were carrying a burden invisible to the world. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice soft but clear. "Are you Mary?" Mary paused, brushing her hands against her apron. "I am. How can I help you?" The woman glanced at Matthias, who was carefully stacking pears, then back at Mary. She hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "My name is Anna," she said finally. "I heard about you from the men who brought you supplies. They said you've been caring for this boy, taking him in as your own." Mary nodded, her voice steady. "That's right. This is Matthias. He's a part of my family now." Anna's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes remained somber. "I came to offer my help. I have resources, food, clothes, even money if you need it. Mary's brow furrowed slightly. Offers of kindness were becoming more common, but something about Anna's tone made her curious. "That's very generous of you," Mary said carefully. "But may I ask why you want to help?" Anna's composure faltered for a moment. She looked down at her gloved hands, her fingers twisting together. "Because once, I needed help too. And someone showed me compassion when I least deserved it. I promised myself that I'd repay that kindness whenever I could." Mary's expression softened. She recognized the unspoken pain in Anna's voice, the way her words carried more than just an offer, they carried a story. "Well, Anna, we'd be grateful for any help you can offer," Mary said. "But if you ever want to talk, you're welcome here too." Anna looked up, surprised by the invitation. For a brief moment, the distant look in her eyes melted into something warmer. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I may take you up on that." As Anna left, Matthias looked up from his work. "Who was she?" he asked, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Someone who's been through her own struggles," Mary replied. "She reminds me of how important it is to keep helping, no matter how hard things get." The day continued as usual, but Anna's visit lingered in Mary's thoughts. That night, as Matthias dozed by the fire, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short time. Her small home, once a place of solitude, had become a haven, not just for Matthias, but for others who felt drawn to her kindness. The men from the neighboring town, the vendors who offered their wares, and now Anna, with her quiet strength and mysterious past, all of them were part of something larger. Mary sat by the window, watching the stars glimmer in the icy sky. She wondered if she was doing enough, if her small actions could truly make a difference in a world so vast and unpredictable. But then her gaze shifted to Matthias, his face peaceful in the firelight, and she knew the answer. Every act of kindness mattered. Every seed planted had the potential to grow into something greater. And as long as she had the strength to keep going, she would. Over the next few days, Anna's name began to circulate in the market, though not because of anything she had done openly. Her visit to Mary's stall had been brief, yet vendors were curious about the elegantly dressed woman who had stopped to speak so earnestly with Mary. "She looked like she belonged in the city," one vendor whispered to another. "Maybe she's come to buy the market," another speculated, their tone half joking. Mary ignored the chatter, focusing on her work. But she couldn't deny that Anna's visit had left an impression on her. There was something about the woman's demeanor, graceful but burdened, that lingered in Mary's mind. It wasn't long before Anna returned. This time, she arrived just as the market was quieting down, the sun dipping low on the horizon. Mary was packing up the last of her apples, with Matthias carefully loading the cart beside her. "Good evening, Mary," Anna greeted, her voice soft yet carrying a sense of purpose. Mary turned, her expression warm. "Anna. It's good to see you again." Anna stepped closer, holding a small wicker basket covered with a cloth. She handed it to Mary, who accepted it with a curious glance. "I brought a few things," Anna said. "Some bread, preserves, and a little money. It's not much, but I hope it helps." Mary peeked under the cloth, her heart warming at the sight of the carefully prepared items. "Thank you, Anna. You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Anna replied. She hesitated, then added, "But I didn't just come to bring this. I was hoping to talk." Mary nodded, sensing the weight behind Anna's words. She gestured toward a bench near the edge of the market. "Let's sit." As the two women settled on the bench, Matthias gave them space, staying near the cart but watching curiously. Anna took a deep breath before speaking. "You asked me why I wanted to help. I told you part of it, but the truth is, I see myself in that boy." She glanced toward Matthias, her expression softening. "When I was younger, I was in a situation not so different from his. My family fell on hard times, and we had nothing. There were days I didn't know where my next meal would come from. But someone, a stranger, took me in. They gave me food, shelter, and the chance to rebuild my life. Mary listened intently, her hands folded in her lap. That stranger changed everything for you, she said gently. Anna nodded, her eyes glistening. They did. And I've spent my life trying to live up to that kindness. But it's not always easy. People, they don't always understand why someone like me would care about those in need. Mary smiled knowingly. I understand that. People in this market whispered about me when I took in Matthias. Some still do. But I've learned that what matters isn't what they say, it's what we do. Anna looked at Mary, her lips curving into a faint smile. You're stronger than most, Mary. I can see that. Mary shook her head, her tone humble. I'm just doing what feels right. And so are you. The two women sat in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the market fading as the night grew colder. Finally, Anna stood, brushing off her coat. I should go, she said. But, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you only have to ask. Thank you, Anna, Mary said sincerely. And if you ever need someone to talk to, you're always welcome here. Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful as she walked away into the evening. That night, as Mary and Matthias sat by the fire, she found herself reflecting on Anna's story. It was a reminder that kindness often came full circle, passed from one person to another like a thread weaving an invisible bond. As Matthias leaned against her shoulder, his voice soft with sleepiness, he murmured, Mary, do you think Anna will be okay? Mary placed a gentle hand on his head, smoothing his hair. I think she will, Matthias. She's stronger than she knows. Just like you are. The boy smiled, his eyes closing as the warmth of the fire and Mary's steady presence lulled him to sleep. The frost thickened in the mornings, painting the windows of Mary's house with delicate crystalline patterns. Despite the biting cold, life at the market carried on. Matthias had become a familiar face to everyone who frequented the stalls, and his infectious laughter often brought warmth to even the chilliest days. Mary noticed how much he had grown, not just physically, though the once slightly oversized coat Anna had gifted him now fit perfectly, but in confidence and spirit. He spoke to customers with ease, managed small tasks independently, and even began trading small jokes with the other vendors. One evening, as they walked home, Matthias tugged at Mary's sleeve. Mary, he began, his voice hesitant, do you think I could save some of the coins we earn? Just a little bit. Mary glanced at him, her expression curious. Of course, dear. But may I ask why? Matthias hesitated, kicking a pebble along the dirt path. I was thinking, if I save enough, maybe I can buy something special. For you. Mary stopped in her tracks, her heart swelling. She knelt to his level, placing her hands on his shoulders. Matthias, she said gently, you don't have to buy me anything. Having you here, seeing you happy, that's more than I could ever ask for. The boy's cheeks flushed, but he nodded. I want to do something nice. Like you always do for me. Mary smiled, her eyes shimmering in the soft moonlight. If that's what you want, I won't stop you. But remember, kindness doesn't have to cost anything. It's in the little things we do every day. The boy nodded again, a shy but determined smile on his face. The next day at the market, Matthias was unusually focused. Between helping customers and organizing the stall, he carefully counted the small handful of coins he had tucked into his pocket. Mary pretended not to notice, though she couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and amusement. Later that afternoon, as they began packing up, Matthias spotted Donna Helena at her bakery stall. He whispered something to Mary and dashed off, clutching his coins tightly. Mary watched from a distance as Matthias spoke with Helena, his face animated. The baker listened, her stern expression softening into a rare smile. She nodded and disappeared behind her stall, returning moments later with a small package wrapped in parchment paper. Matthias handed her the coins, his grin stretching from ear to ear as he carefully cradled the package. When he returned to Mary, he hid the parcel behind his back, his excitement barely contained. "What's that you've got there?" Mary asked, feigning curiosity. "It's a surprise," Matthias said, his tone teasing. "You'll see later." That evening, after dinner, Matthias insisted Mary sit by the fire while he retrieved the package. He approached her with a mixture of nervousness and pride, holding out the small bundle. "Here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mary took the package, her fingers trembling slightly. As she unwrapped it, the scent of freshly baked sweet rolls filled the air. She looked up at Matthias, her eyes misty. "Sweet rolls," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your favorite." "They're for you," Matthias said quickly. "I remembered you said you liked them too, but you never buy any for yourself. So I wanted to share." Mary placed the package on the table and pulled Matthias into a tight embrace. "Thank you, dear. This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." The boy beamed, his joy evident in the way he hugged her back. As they shared the sweet rolls by the fire, Mary couldn't help but marvel at how far Matthias had come. The boy who once shied away from kindness was now learning to give it in return, shaping his own path with compassion and thoughtfulness. That night, as Mary lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, a contented smile on her face. Life had a way of surprising her, and in Matthias, she had found not only a companion but a reminder of the beauty in small, selfless acts. The days grew shorter as winter settled over Rosario du Vale. A light dusting of snow covered the ground in the mornings, crunching softly under Mary and Matthias's feet as they made their way to the market. The boy's cheeks were pink from the cold, but his spirits were high, especially after the success of his gift to Mary. Their bond had deepened, and Matthias now carried himself with a confidence that had been unimaginable when he first arrived. Mary often found herself marveling at how he had transformed from a timid child into someone who could light up the market with his smile. One particularly brisk morning, as they worked at the stall, Anna reappeared. She wore a dark coat and a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Though her posture was as poised as ever, her face seemed more strained than the last time Mary had seen her. "Anna," Mary greeted warmly. "It's good to see you." Anna returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wanted to talk again, if you have time." Mary nodded, sensing the weight in Anna's words. "Of course. Let's step aside for a moment." As Matthias kept an eye on the stall, Mary and Anna moved to a quieter corner of the market. Anna hesitated, her gloved hands clasped tightly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Anna began. "About doing what feels right, even when others might not understand. It's been difficult for me, balancing what I feel I should do with the expectations people have of me." Mary tilted her head, her expression gentle but curious. "What do you mean?" Anna took a deep breath. "I come from a family that values appearances above all else. They've always expected me to follow certain rules, live a certain way. But helping people like Matthias, or like I once was, isn't part of that plan. They see it as a distraction, a waste of my position." Mary's heart ached at the vulnerability in Anna's voice. "It sounds like you're torn between what they want and what your heart tells you." Anna nodded, her eyes glistening. "Exactly. Every time I help someone, I feel free. Like I'm honoring the person who once helped me. But it always comes with judgment, from my family, from others. It's exhausting." Mary reached out, placing a comforting hand on Anna's arm. "Anna, you have a good heart. And following that, even when it's hard, is never the wrong choice. People may judge, but their opinions don't define you. The kindness you give, that's what truly matters." Anna's composure cracked, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away, nodding. "Thank you, Mary. You make it sound so simple. It's not always simple, Mary admitted. But it's worth it. And you're stronger than you think, Anna. I can see it. Anna smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her sorrow. You're an incredible woman, Mary. I hope you know that. Mary chuckled softly. I'm just doing what feels right, like you are. As they returned to the stall, Matthias waved enthusiastically at them, his grin wide. We sold almost everything, he called out. Anna laughed, the sound light and unburdened. You've got quite the little businessman here, she said to Mary. Mary beamed with pride. He's a natural. Before leaving, Anna leaned down to speak to Matthias. Keep helping Mary. You're lucky to have each other. Matthias nodded earnestly. I will. She's the best. As Anna walked away, Mary watched her figure disappear into the bustling market. There was a strength in Anna now, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. Mary felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing she had helped someone find clarity in their struggles. That evening, as the snow began to fall softly outside their home, Mary and Matthias shared a simple meal by the fire. The boy chattered about the day's sales, his excitement bubbling over. Do you think Anna will come back again? He asked between bites. I think she will, Mary replied, her voice steady. She's finding her way, just like we are. Matthias nodded, content with the answer. As they finished their meal and prepared for bed, Mary found herself reflecting on the ripple effects of kindness. In her own quiet way, she was beginning to see how her actions inspired not just Matthias, but others like Anna. The thought filled her with a deep, quiet pride. The world could be cold and uncertain, but within her small corner of it, warmth and hope continued to grow. The snow grew heavier as winter deepened, blanketing Rosario du Vale in shimmering white. The market, though quieter now, remained a hub of activity for the hardy vendors and customers who braved the cold. Mary and Matthias adjusted to the season, their routine steady as ever, though Mary noticed Matthias shivering more often despite his warm coat. One morning, as they prepared their stall, Matthias coughed lightly, a small, dry sound, but enough to catch Mary's attention. Are you feeling all right? She asked, placing a hand on his forehead. Matthias gave her a sheepish smile. I'm fine, Mary. It's just the cold. Mary wasn't convinced. She made a mental note to brew some tea with honey and herbs that evening, a remedy her mother had sworn by. As the day wore on, however, Matthias's energy waned. By midday, his cheeks were flushed, and his normally bright eyes seemed dulled. Let's pack up early, Mary said, her voice firm but kind. But we haven't sold everything yet, Matthias protested weakly. We've done enough for today, Mary replied, already gathering the unsold fruit. Your health is more important. Matthias didn't argue further, his small body leaning heavily against the cart as they walked home through the snow. That evening, Mary set Matthias up near the fire with extra blankets, a warm cup of tea, and a bowl of thick soup. The boy tried to insist he wasn't sick, but Mary wasn't taking chances. You've been working so hard, Matthias, she said gently. Sometimes even the strongest need to rest. Matthias sipped his tea, his expression thoughtful. Do you think I'll get better soon? I don't want to miss the market. You'll get better, Mary assured him. But you need to let your body heal. The market will still be there when you're ready. The following days were quieter without Matthias at her side. Mary missed his laughter and the way he charmed the customers, but she was determined to let him rest. She returned home earlier each day, checking on him and ensuring he had everything he needed. By the third day, his fever had begun to subside, and his energy returned in small bursts. As he sat by the fire one evening, he looked up at Mary with wide eyes. Do you think people missed me at the market? He asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. Mary smiled, ruffling his hair. I know they did. You're part of the market now, Matthias. People notice when you're not there. His face brightened at her words, though he still seemed unsure. The next morning, as Mary prepared to leave for the market, Matthias surprised her by getting dressed and grabbing his coat. "I'm coming with you," he announced, determination in his voice. "Are you sure you're ready?" Mary asked, raising an eyebrow. "I feel better now," Matthias insisted. "And I don't want you to do everything alone." Mary hesitated but eventually nodded, bundling him up in an extra scarf before they set off. At the market, the vendors greeted Matthias warmly, several expressing relief to see him back. Donna Helena even handed him a small roll, her gruff voice softened by genuine concern. "You gave us all a scare, boy," she said. "Don't overdo it now." "I won't," Matthias promised, his voice cheerful as he took the roll. As the day went on, Mary watched with pride as Matthias slipped seamlessly back into his role, his energy gradually returning. It was clear that he had missed the market as much as the market had missed him. That evening, as they walked home under a clear, starlit sky, Matthias tugged at Mary's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Mary asked, surprised. "For taking care of me," he said, his tone earnest. "For everything." Mary's throat tightened, but she managed a smile. "That's what families do, Matthias. We take care of each other." The boy nodded, his small hand gripping hers tightly. As they reached the house, Mary felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey they had taken together was far from over, but in moments like these, she knew they were building something unshakable, something that would carry them through whatever came next. The days passed, and Matthias's health fully returned. The brightness in his eyes and the bounce in his step reassured Mary, who silently thanked the heavens for his recovery. With winter still lingering, the two returned to their routine at the market, finding comfort in the rhythm of their days. One crisp morning, as the stalls bustled with activity, a familiar figure approached. Anna, wrapped in an elegant wool coat, carried herself with her usual grace. But there was something different about her, a lightness in her step, a warmth in her expression. "Good morning, Mary," Anna greeted, her smile genuine. Mary looked up from arranging her fruits, her own face brightening. "Anna. It's good to see you. You look well." Anna chuckled softly. "I feel well, for the first time in a long time. I've been thinking about our last conversation, about following my heart. And I realized I've been holding back. I want to do more." Mary's curiosity piqued. "More? What do you have in mind?" Anna's gaze flicked to Matthias, who was helping a customer count their change. "I want to create something that helps children like Matthias. A place where they can be safe, learn, and grow. There are so many out there who need a chance, just like he did." Mary felt a swell of emotion at Anna's words. "That's a beautiful idea, Anna. What made you decide to do this?" Anna hesitated, her voice softening. "Because I remember what it was like to have nothing. And because I see what a difference you've made in his life. You've inspired me, Mary." Mary placed a hand over her heart, touched by Anna's sincerity. "If there's any way I can help, you only have to ask." Anna smiled, her eyes glistening. "Actually, there is something. I want Matthias to help me design it, if he's willing, of course. He has such a bright spirit, and I think he could teach us all something about resilience." Mary glanced at Matthias, who was now playfully stacking apples for a young child. Her heart swelled with pride. "I think he'd love that. Let me talk to him about it." As the day wound down and they packed their cart, Mary broached the subject with Matthias. "Anna wants to start a place for children," she began, her tone casual but hopeful. "She asked if you'd help her. What do you think?" Matthias looked up, his brow furrowing. "Me? What can I do?" Mary knelt in front of him, her hands resting on his small shoulders. "You can share your story, your ideas. Anna thinks you have a lot to offer, and I do too. Mateus's expression shifted from confusion to contemplation, and then to a small, shy smile. "If you think I can help, then I'll do it." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Mateus peppered Mary with questions about Anna's plan. His excitement was contagious, and Mary felt a deep sense of satisfaction seeing him so eager to contribute. The following week, Anna invited them to her home, a stately house at the edge of town. For Mateus, it was a world unlike anything he'd ever seen. The polished wood floors, the crackling fireplace, and the rows of books lining the walls filled him with awe. Anna welcomed them warmly, leading them to a cozy sitting room where she laid out her vision. She spoke of creating a community space, a haven where children could learn skills, share meals, and feel cared for. As Anna explained, Mateus listened intently, his small hands gripping the edge of his chair. When she asked for his thoughts, he hesitated at first, glancing at Mary for reassurance. "You could have a garden," he said finally, his voice tentative but growing steadier. "Kids could help grow vegetables and learn how to take care of plants. And maybe a place to draw and paint. I think that would make them happy." Anna's face lit up. "A garden and an art space. That's perfect, Mateus. Thank you." As they left Anna's house that evening, Mateus's steps were lighter, his head held higher. "Do you think it'll work?" he asked Mary as they walked home under the stars. "I think it will," Mary replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "Because it's built on kindness. And kindness always finds a way." That night, as Mateus drifted off to sleep, Mary sat by the window, her thoughts swirling with hope. Anna's vision felt like a natural extension of everything they had been working toward, a testament to how far they had come and a promise of what was still possible. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet but meaningful progress. Anna's vision began to take shape, and Mary and Mateus became integral to the process. Each evening, the three of them met to discuss plans, sharing ideas and refining the project. Mateus threw himself into the work with enthusiasm. He sketched simple drawings of what the garden might look like, labeling rows for vegetables and flowers. He spoke excitedly about how children could care for the plants and watch them grow, just as he had grown under Mary's care. One afternoon, while Mateus was at Anna's house, Mary stayed behind at the market to tend to the stall. As she arranged her fruits, several vendors approached her. "Mary," Donna Helena said, her tone curious, "we've been hearing about this place Anna's planning. A center for children, right?" Mary nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's right. It's something she's passionate about, and Mateus is helping her design it." The other vendors exchanged glances. "It's a good idea," one of them said. "There are plenty of kids around here who could use a place like that. It could bring the community together," added another. Mary felt a surge of pride. The support from her fellow vendors was unexpected but deeply appreciated. When she returned home that evening, Mateus was already waiting for her by the fire, his sketches spread out across the table. His face lit up as she entered. "Mary," Anna said, "we're almost ready to start building the garden," he exclaimed. "That's wonderful, Mateus," Mary said, sitting beside him to look over the plans. As she studied his drawings, she noticed the care he had put into every detail. There was a corner for flowers, a row for carrots and lettuce, and even a small pond he had imagined, though it was labeled with a question mark. "Do you think we'll have enough space for everything?" he asked, his tone a mix of excitement and worry. "I think with your ideas and Anna's help, it will be perfect," Mary assured him. The first day of construction arrived with clear skies and a crisp breeze. Anna had gathered a small group of volunteers from the community, including some of the vendors who had initially been skeptical of Mary's choices. Mateus worked alongside the adults, his small hands eagerly digging into the earth. Mary watched from a distance, her heart swelling as she saw how focused and determined he was. Throughout the day, laughter and chatter filled the air. What had started as a vision in Anna's mind and a dream in Mateus's heart was becoming a reality. By evening, the outlines of the garden were clear, rows of tilled soil, spaces marked for planting, and an open area where children could gather. As the sun set, the group gathered around the garden, their faces glowing with pride and exhaustion. Anna stood at the center, her voice carrying over the quiet murmur of the crowd. "This is just the beginning," she said, her eyes shining. "What we've built today is more than a garden. It's a place where hope can grow, where children can find safety and joy. And it wouldn't have been possible without each of you." The crowd applauded, and Anna turned to Matthias, motioning him forward. "Matthias," she said, her voice warm, "this garden wouldn't exist without your ideas. You've shown us all how powerful hope and kindness can be." The boy's face turned red, but his smile was wide as he stood beside Anna. The applause grew louder, and Mary's eyes filled with tears of pride. That night, as she and Matthias walked home under the stars, he clutched her hand tightly. "Mary," he said, his voice soft, "do you think the garden will help kids like me?" Mary stopped, kneeling to meet his gaze. "I know it will, Matthias. Because it's built with love, just like you are. And love has a way of changing everything." Matthias nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I hope so. I want them to feel happy, like I do now." As they continued walking, Mary felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The journey they had taken together had been full of challenges, but it had led them to this moment, a testament to how far they had come and the lives they had touched along the way.